In fact, he was beginning to sense that everyone around him could not wait for Not to step down. To die, he finally said to himself. He could further admit that Not was the main reason for all of this, or more correctly, her indifference to naming a successor. Perhaps the Yolopile and her entitled society within, but lately common citizens, even ranking officials, Not and his staff seemed to be acting as though this elbowing and jockeying for power would not have repercussions. Why? How could an eater of the highest grade, the captain no less, be powerless to stop this? It would seem that even the Abyss had limitations in her ability to protect her darling. Deicide thumped out of his estate, through the courtyard and into the officers' plaza. Its lights still dim because of the early hour, but the muted illumination bouncing from the polished floors lit the massive space a great deal. He decided to drop by one of the enlisted mess halls on his way. Being the early hour, it was mostly empty and only serving continental breakfast. Deicide did not bother with grabbing a tray. He nodded and waved to soldiers still half asleep, chucking pastries onto their trays, hoping to fill their bellies before going on watch or patrolling the districts. The dining hall was decorated with spotless gray metal, possibly for easy cleanup. Deicide could not say. He had long forgotten the mandatory galley duties of his youth. "Hey, sir, you want eggs or something?" a young culinary specialist said. Deicide's antennas curled closer to his head. "I'm fine, thank you," Deicide said, wondering what kind of hold eggs had on these humans. "Oh, come on. How about a breakfast wrap? I know you want one," he said. The Abyss cooed softly. "All right," Deicide said. His mouth had already begun the Pavlovian response. The man put on his gloves and reached his arm into the darkness of some strange contraption. His hand came up with a steaming pocket of dough stuffed with meat, looking as delectable as it had been, just made seconds ago. The device enabled food to be kept in the same condition as when it went in. The item Deicide held might have been made hundreds of years ago, its ingredients greater still. Not had applied the same process on many number of departments, such as ammo storage and transport. Experimentations on living subjects had all failed. The insides of these sorry creatures unraveled and putrefied until it was no more than a black soup, similar to the Abyss. Deicide thanked the man and walked on with his breakfast. The act of mastication was a strange thing to an eater, especially Deicide, who with his umbilical units did not necessarily need to eat with any sort of regularity. He was constantly provided a gruel-like substance that warded off hunger and malnutrition. Eating was still very pleasurable to the soldiers, but was more psychological than an act that was bolted in absoluteness. To eat was to be social with one's peers, to military personnel. Eating alone was seen as drinking alone. Just after leaving the mess hall, the Abyss alerted Deicide that another set of eyes were on them. He whirled with his mouth full of food, finding no one. Then as he turned back, he nearly ran into a man who barely came up to his chin. He stepped back and scowled at the man, as he swallowed with great difficulty. He was a spy, as he was wearing the dark gray weaver's uniform, underneath it, a tight-fitting multi-layered suit called a skid, filled with the same oily substance the Abyss was struck from, save for its inert status. His faceplate was down, as weavers always hid their identities in public. The clandestine circumstances of their missions afforded them with knowledge which was desperately sought after. The focus of their work remained in the districts, but there had been cases of rebel espionage that extended even into Yulopile's chiefs of staff. This particular weaver carried a pair of spine blades, a rarity, which was completely unheard of, as one spine blade was enough for all eaters. His reason was that he was stricken with a birth defect that had sent his spine askew, splitting it into a ragged X on his back. Living in the impoverished ghettos of the districts did not lend him the care he needed. This ailment crippled him before he began any formal education, and his mother had decided to homeschool the youth. Though he lacked the full use of his left arm and right leg, his mother encouraged him to exercise and would not allow him to stagnate inside. It was on one of his daily walks that he come upon Deicide and his entourage. Wanting to get a closer look at the famed captain, he set about inching forward, using the ever-present shadow within city without daylight. Two-Spine had learned to use the darkness and shadow to avoid the more sadistic neighborhood children, those that wished more than to call him names. When Two-Spine emerged within the Abyss's kill range, the man only smiled and beckoned him to come closer. The boy still had not been noticed by his personal guard of risk-eaters and deathless. Deicide began to nod as he looked the boy over. He seemed to possess the natural ability of becoming ambient. Deicide doubted he would have noticed the boy without the abyss on his back, ever watchful, ever deadly. Deicide forcefully swallowed another bite. "Be damned, too! What is it?" he said. "That food production plant we've been eyeing," Two Spines said. Even with his voice modulation activated, the man spoke in a breathy, hushed tone, as if rebel spies had already infiltrated the Yolopile and were lying in wait as food service attendants. "Go on," Deicide said. He hesitated, taking another bite, looking at his breakfast curiously. He could still remember the rebels striking through purposeful contamination. The fiends. The poison had not been enough to kill even a single person, but did cause numerous people, including himself, to embarrassingly excuse themselves to their quarters. "Cyborgs," Two Spines said. "Yes. Only mechanization could put humans on par with human eaters. Certainly no one with his blood," Deicide thought. Deicide looked around and urged the smaller man to walk with him. "That was only in your district, correct?" Deicide said. "Yes, sir. They're pretty primitive, though. They're still using designs from their home world. They don't have the materials to make the stuff we saw in Chalybus," Two Spines said. "I still don't like the idea of having unregistered cyborgs running around. Even if they're only using them to exploit each other, they're still using my plans to power them. Tell your chief I'll have it busted up immediately. And order some grief givers if you have to," Deicide said. It occurred to him that weavers always worked in pairs. His eyes suddenly began searching for the female partner who must be watching close by. "Sir, they'll just cause trouble," Two Spines said. Deicide chuckled. "That's what they're for, my boy," he said, clapping the man on the back as he glanced over to a trash recycling system and waved his breakfast at it. He dragged the shorter man over to it, squeezing him tightly to his chest. "Why don't you ever say hello, Solemn?" Deicide said. Immediately a small kill box was retracted and a female weaver appeared crouched on top of a TRS can, her hand never far from her spine blade. Her pale blonde hair was cut to an even length. "The mission only required one speaker to engage the target, sir," Solemn said. Her voice modulation made her sound like a robotic overlord. "Engage the... Who exactly do you work for?" Deicide said. "Even a briefing is a mission, sir," Solemn said. Deicide rolled his eyes. "Come down off of there. Come here," Deicide said. When she did, Deicide draped his other arm across her shoulders. Many mistook Deicide's display of affection to be just that, but the closer he and the Abyss were, the more they could glean from those signals pure humans and those born inside the Yolopile had grown accustomed to hiding. A gentle but awkward hug during a personal conversation was much less accusatory than spreading a kill box, which was tantamount to an inquisition. "Now what about that Darwin kid? War?" "Just territorial disputes. He wants to be the sole ruler of the district," Solemn said. "His family is already the richest. How does that benefit him exactly?" Deicide said. "It doesn't. He just wants to impress you," Two Spines said. "We can kill him if you wish, sir," Solemn said plainly. The indifference weavers displayed to making death had always disheartened Deicide. She may as well have been asking to remove a hair from his lapel, knowing the depths of weaver efficiency. Poor Darwinian could already have a spine blade to his throat as they walked, and weaver operatives were waiting on a particular sniff from Deicide to release him from his privileged status as prince of the city. Deicide waved his hands. "As long as it doesn't hurt us, let him play. It's just a district," Deicide said. "Carry on." The two weavers seemed to blur out of physical existence, but Deicide felt them slip from beneath his armpits and leap over the railing. Killing this prince would do nothing but restart the turf wars amongst the gangs and the griefer officers, Deicide thought. Not that he cared that mobsters and gangbangers killed each other, but they were less precise in their attacks than a centralized power would force them to be. Not that they cared either. However, civilian deaths and power input was all that Deicide cared about concerning the districts. It was best for large forces to be seen fighting it out. Blame could be assigned for blunders, people could be punished, exterminated. Deicide continued on to the transport hangar. After a hop through a few space-folding gates, he stopped before he turned the corner to straighten his uniform and wipe his mouth. Moving on once the Abyss chirped with approval, He put on a smile and tried to emit a pleasant aura as he emerged from the darkness and into the brightly lit hangar. He clasped his hands behind his back, pausing briefly to make certain he was in the right hangar.